Owls in the Family, Chapter 11, our last chapter. Last time I asked, what is the main problem in this story? There was lots of little problems in every chapter, but what do you think the main problem is? What's the biggest problem? And I told you as a hint to think about conflict. Who is always in the middle of all the troubles? So Wool has conflict with the mailman. That was one thing that happened. There were many things that happened. Wool had conflict with the teacher, Fifi. Remember that? Charged into the school. Wool had a problem with the neighborhood dogs and cats. Remember, he killed one cat and then he scared that dog that thought he was going to take a bite out of him. And then all the dogs were scared of him from then on. He also scared the bullies at the cave. So that was another one for Wool. He had conflict there. So the whole story is full of conflict, but it all centers around Wool. So what is the main problem in this story? It's not each one of these conflicts, it's all of them together. So let's look at this side here. So Wool, who is supposed to be a wild animal, and who does he have trouble with all the time? He has trouble with what we call humanity or civilization. So people that live in a town. And dogs and cats are part of that because they live with people with very little problem. They're domesticated animals. So the problem is between the wild animal and humans or civilizations. So Wool was not designed to live with people. So I would say the main problem is that Wool is supposed to be a wild animal and he has problems living with humans and in a human situation, which makes sense. And every time there's a problem in a chapter, it has to do with this. At the end, we're going to see what the solution is to that problem. Chapter 11. The spring when Weeps and Wool became 3 years old was a very sad spring for me. My father had taken a new job, so we had to leave Saskatoon and go east to the big Ontario city of Toronto. There would be no more sloughs, no gophers, no bluffs, and worst of all, no prairies in Toronto. I hated the idea of moving, but most of all I hated leaving my friends behind me, both my human and my animal friends. We couldn't take Weeps and Wool because they would have had to spend all their days locked up in a cage, and that would have been cruel. On the other hand, we couldn't just turn them loose either, because they had been members of a human family for so long, they wouldn't have been able to look out for themselves. All we could do was try to find someone who would give them a new home. I talked to most of my chums about this, friends or chums, and they all said they were willing to take my owls, but their parents wouldn't hear of it. Then one day, I thought of Bruce. He and his family had moved away from Saskatoon a while earlier and were running a fox farm about 200 miles to the northwest. I sat down and wrote Bruce a letter, and a few days later I got this reply. Dear Billy, it is pretty good here. There are lots of ducks, and we have started the fox farm and got lots of pups. Dad says sure, I can have the owls. We have an old fox pen I am fixing up to keep them, and I am building a wood house in it to keep them warm. Rex is healthy and says hello to Mutt and says please bring Mutt up here for a visit when you come with the owls. There is a lot of Indians here, so he means First Nations kids, and I go to school with a lot of real Indian kids. When you come, I will take you there and you can ride some of their horses. So long, your old pal Bruce. Boys and girls, I don't know if you noticed, there's a lot of spelling mistakes in there. I showed the letter to my father. Sounds fine, Billy, he said. What do you say we drive the owls up to Bruce's place on Friday afternoon and stay over for a visit until Sunday night. I said yes, of course, and that was what we did. It was a wonderful trip to Bruce's. The sloughs were full of water, and the water was covered with ducks resting on their way north. We saw prairie chickens dancing on the side of the road, and there were more meadow larks and red-tailed hawks than you could shake a stick at. The owls rode with me and Mutt in the rumble seat, and they had a wonderful time. When we got to the farm, Bruce's mother had a big feed ready for us. On Saturday, Bruce took me to the Indian reservation to meet his pals. One of them, a boy about my age named Harry Wildhawk, loaned me a cayuse. So can you tell from the picture what the cayuse is? So it's a breed of horse. Okay. And the three of us rode all over the old prairie that day, chasing coyotes and jackrabbits on horseback. On Sunday, Bruce and I stayed around the farm, and I helped him finish off the cage where Wool and Weeps would sleep at night. That was a sad business, though, and I kept wishing that Saturday could have gone on forever. Wool and Weeps didn't seem to suspect anything. I think they were having too much fun to be suspicious. Wool went off and explored the big poplar bluffs behind the fox farm, and they walked all around among the fox cages, hooting at the foxes and daring them to start something. Weeps found his way to the meat house where the fox food was ground up in a big mincing machine, and the hired man fed Weeps so many scraps that he could hardly walk at all. Sunday night, we put the two owls in their new cage. Weeps was asleep almost before I could turn the catch on the door, but all of a sudden Wool seemed to sense that something was wrong. He gave a funny sort of hoot, and then he jumped over to the door and put his head against the wire mesh. I reached down and tickled him behind his horns for a minute, and he seemed to think things were all right again. He climbed back up to his perch and fluffed out his feathers for the night. I said, "Goodbye, old owls. You look after each other. Someday, maybe, I'll be back." The end. And right at the end of the book, there is a little paragraph called "A Note from the Author." So now he's not telling the story anymore, but he's talking to us as the reader. Were Wool and Weeps real owls? Of course they were. And Mutt and Rex and Murray and Bruce and I were real. And if you should happen to be going to Saskatoon in the spring of the year, and if you should happen to take a walk across the prairie, it wouldn't surprise me in the least if you happen to meet some of us. And if it's a big white owl and a not so big brown owl you meet, give them my love. Will you? Oh, that's a good book. All right. So the main problem in the story was that it was really hard for a wild animal, even though it thought it was human, to live among humans. It had a lot of conflict with all different parts of people in the town and animals in the town and all kinds of things like that. So in the end, what was a good solution for Weeps and Wool, especially Wool? Well, he actually got to live farther away from a town. So the place that they talked about where Bruce had moved to was really far away from a town or from a big city. So we would say it was far away from civilization. It was actually a farm. Okay, so he's on a farm. And there's not too many people that Wool can get into trouble with there. And he can go exploring behind the farm and look in the cottonwood bluffs and be very, very, very well looked after. Must have been sad though. Okay, final question. What was your favorite part of the story? So in the comment box, can you please write down your favorite thing that happened? Don't say my favorite part was Wool. That's not writing your favorite part of the story. So I want you to think about things that happened. the pet parade, the skunk, the cave, Woolen Weeps riding on the rumble seat, the canoe trip, shooting at the crows, Wool attacking the cat, Wool attacking the dog, Wool coming into the classroom, Wool biting the mailman. So many things that happened in the story. So think about what your favorite part was and write that in the comment box. I hope you enjoyed the story.